Michael Pearce, Director of the Alabama Center for the Book. The Alabama Center is an affiliate of the Library of Congress Center for the Book in Washington, D.C. Our mission is to promote books, reading, libraries, and literacy with a special emphasis on promoting the unique literary heritage of each state or territory. The authors featured in this video are from the Midwestern and Eastern regions of the United States. Their books were chosen by the affiliate centers for the book to represent their state's literary heritage. These so-called great reads from great places are chosen every year by the affiliate centers. You can see the entire list from this year and preceding years at www.read.gov/greatreads. These authors are here with us today to discuss their work, and they will also address the theme of this year's National Book Festival, Books Bring Us Together. I hope you will enjoy this conversation and consider listening to all the authors in these Great Reads videos. Together, they are a testament to the richness and diversity of this nation's literary creativity.
Tell us a little bit about you, what your book is about, and what you hope people take away from reading your book.
I've always enjoyed being outside and being in nature, and we have grandchildren today, and they enjoy the same things we do. And we thought it was really important to try to create a book that would engage other people in that. Our farm is near the Missouri River, west of St. Louis a ways, and we spend a lot of time there. It's in a very unique location, a very historic place, and we wanted to share this area with other people and engage them in what we do to conserve the area. We want people to love this part of Missouri a little more. This area west of St. Louis along the Missouri River is historic and unique in many ways, and we think that people conserve and preserve what they love. And so the goal with our book is to get people of all ages, children, grandchildren, grandparents, parents, to love this part of Missouri a little more and to appreciate it and join us in conserving it. Our book is about the changes in the Missouri River from the little town of Thurman, west of St. Louis, to the confluence of the Missouri and Mississippi rivers that's been called by past explorers and writers the greatest confluence in the world. This 60 miles of Missouri River, the longest river in America, is a microcosm of the story of the historic development of America. It's a story of immigration and development and exploration, and it all happens in this little ribbon of land between Thurman, Missouri, settled by Germans in the 1840s, to the confluence of these two great rivers. And it's an extremely special and interesting place right in the backyard of St. Louis. The stories we're telling are about those of 9 generations of children that have grown up along the Missouri River since Lewis and Clark explored it. We set these stories in 9 different unique river towns that all experienced their own growing stories during this period from 1804 to current times. This area is peopled, developed by German immigrants that came to this area for the first time in the 1830s and 40s and settled an area that had been explored by Lewis and Clark and Daniel Boone. Railroads came, steamboats came, and eventually the railroad turned into a trail that's today America's longest state park, and the Katy Trail from the Katy Railroad, and it gives people a chance to explore the area on bicycles or on foot and visit every river town that we talk about in the book.
I grew up in a very book-focused family. So from the earliest years of my reading, I just had a deep love and passion for picture books. I actually still have most of my picture books because I just could never part with them. And that's really what led me, I guess, to want to be able to create those experiences for kids today. The story of Susanna Salter, I was actually researching something else when I saw a one-line item about it, and it grabbed my attention immediately. And I had to investigate and dig and get to the bottom of the story, because I felt like there had to be much more than what I had seen online about her after a cursory bit of research. And I was absolutely right. The more I read about her, the more I did research with the help of some amazing, amazing librarians, genealogists, archivists. The more I realized that people even in Kansas did not know about this woman. And yet at the time in 1887, she became an international icon and represented a belief to people that equity was possible and that it was something to aspire to and to keep working towards and to really feel hopeful with. And so I think among the things I want people to get from Susanna's story, obviously the title tells you that she did become mayor, but there is so much more to it. Her story, although it's historic, it's also quite contemporary. There are so many themes in it that I hope will launch important discussions between kids and the adults to read with them, teachers and students, librarians, what have you.
My story is Fly. Fly is about 5-year-old Africa who hopes to compete in double dutch, even though she has never double dutch before. Africa and her brother see a sign outside that says double dutch competition, and she knows that she can double dutch. And through the help of her friends, they teach her different skills that will help her to compete. I hope that people can take away that it is always okay to try, even when you don't know how to do something. Putting one foot in front of the other is what counts, is what matters. I want kids, when they read Fly, to go for their goals and to go for the things that they want and to not let fear get in the way. I think that when I was younger, I wanted to do so much. There were so many goals I had, but sometimes I let those goals and those fears get in the way. And I wonder what would have happened if I took that first step like Africa. So I want my readers to know it's always, always okay to try.
Around Little Chaski is an adventure that takes readers to the Inca Empire. And we meet a little Chaski, who is a messenger during the times of the Inca. And he has to deliver a message in the hands of the Inca before the sun Taita Inti sets in the sky. And now in his journey, he's gonna have to face some decisions because he meets some animals who need his help, and he's gonna have to choose if he helps or if he keeps running to meet his deadline. So I hope readers find not only a fun story, but also I hope it opens the gates of wanting to learn and understand more about other cultures of the world, maybe places where we haven't heard about before, and want us to explore a little bit more and research and deepen that understanding.
Well, I'm a mother of 3 adult children and a grandmother of 5 little precious ones. I've spent more than 25 years in elementary classrooms. I taught everybody from pre-Kers to 8th grade, but my specialty was designing curriculum and teaching creative thinking skills to gifted children. So today I'm retired and I spend time with my family and friends. I love reading. I spend a lot of time doing that, especially with my book club. I love collaborating with my writers group, praying with my prayer group, and I also enjoy riding my tricycle. So that's a little bit about me. About my book, When I Was an Alligator, is the story of a curious Cajun kid. You can kind of see her in the background there in my little office. She believes that she's been an alligator, and she transforms into a series of wetlands creatures, like a wood duck and a snapping turtle and a catfish and even a mosquito. But in the end, she discovers that she is happy to be who she is, which is a curious Cajun kid. The back material of the book has information for parents and teachers about the wetlands and how fragile they are. And there are also some questions that they can use to discuss with the kids. And the art, like you said, Jim, is layered. It's beautiful. The kids are going to notice more about the art each time they read the story. And there's great onomatopoeia. They love the onomatopoeia. So what I hope that people bring or get from the book, well, most important to me, I hope, first of all, that both kids and grown-ups get this fun, imaginative story that they want to read over and over again. I think that's really important. And I also think that I hope they learn something about the wetlands and the creatures in the wetlands and how fragile they are. Most people don't know that we lose 1 football field's worth of land to the Gulf of Mexico every hour. And I think that's an amazing statistic. It just shows how fragile our Louisiana coastline is. Also, I think the message that kids get, that it's fun to imagine being other things, other creatures, but in the end, it's great to be a kid, especially if they wear glasses and have really good imaginations. I think that's a really good message I hope people take from the book.
Tell us about how you and your book connects to your state.
I have lived in Oklahoma for the past 21 years, and I am an immigrant from Peru in Oklahoma. And I think it connects with the state also, not only because my relationship with Oklahoma, but also because I think it's opening doors to my culture, my homeland culture in Oklahoma. So I visit schools there and I talk to children in Oklahoma, and it's fun to explain to them where I come from, how my country looks like, and build those bridges of understanding and caring for one another.
I am born and raised in Southern Louisiana, lived in Baton Rouge, New Orleans, and now Lafayette. You can trace my ancestry back for generations on both sides of my family to Louisiana. My children and my grandchildren all live in Louisiana. I have all of my college degrees from Louisiana University. So I think I'm pretty well connected to the state.
Susanna Salter is a daughter of Kansas. And I have to admit, my previous experience with the state of Kansas involved a t-shirt from the Royals and a mug from the Royals. Although now I feel like I am as well part Kansan, so I've been told. Susanna Salter lived in a very small city called Argonia, which had a population of under 500 residents in 1887. And today still the population is pretty similar. It's not very close to many things that people are aware of. And so it sort of went under the radar. And yet this woman and her bravery and becoming the first woman elected to serve as mayor, not just in Kansas, but in the world, drew massive attention to the state and in particular to the city of Argonia, which I think is extremely exciting.
I am from Kentucky. I'm from Louisville, Kentucky, the west end of Louisville, and I was born and raised here, even though I've lived different places. I used to live in London. I used to live in Pittsburgh. I used to live in Germany, but I've always come back to home. Kentucky is my home. My grandmother is here. My great aunts are here, and I feel most myself when I am on my street, on my block, in my grandmother's house, just being me. When I was younger, we used to go to a little city called Hodgenville. So we would travel from Louisville, Kentucky to Hodgenville, Kentucky, which is about an hour and a half away. I would sit in the back of my grandmother's dynasty, and I would just look out and kind of watch the city really morph into the countryside, see the like rolling grass, see the horses. And in my head, I would create these stories out of my window. And whenever I think about being a child, that is what I think about. I think about the countryside of Kentucky. I think about going from my city, Louisville, to my family's hometown of Hodgenville, and thinking about my ancestors who lived in Hodgenville, some of them that I knew, some that I didn't know, but just how they are always a part of me, and they've always been a part of me. So when I think about home, when I think about Kentucky, whether I am here in the state or not, that is what I always go back to. So that's how I relate to Kentucky. I think that my book relates to Kentucky because very much Africa is a part of me, a part of my experiences, a part of the things that I wanted to do in the past or the things I didn't get a chance to do. And so she relates to Kentucky because she very much relates to me.
The Missouri River is one of Missouri's greatest assets. It provides drinking water for half of the people in Missouri. And the story in our book talks about not only this great natural resource that we have, but the history that's occurred along the river. In the 1800s, the Missouri River was everything to St. Louis. It was the source of not only the jumping off point for Lewis and Clark, but the source for all kinds of commercial activity through the steamboat industry. Eventually, that ribbon of land along the Missouri River became a place where railroads built on both sides of the river, and commerce flowed from St. Louis to develop the West. It was so important to the development of America. We think that Missourians will be even more proud of their state and of the river that has the name of their state if they hear these stories and they read these stories and they visit these places. And that is the goal of our book, is to get readers to visit the places that we're talking about. And these places are all close to St. Louis. They're a day's drive or far less to experience the history that's still there. In every story we tell, there's a historic location that people can visit to see what we're talking about in our book. The land along the Missouri River is not only fertile cropland, it's some of the best in America. It started as a forest. The land that these small towns that we're talking about in our book, the land where these railroads were built, was originally a forested river bottom that Lewis and Clark explored with great difficulty because of the forests that were there. And they've been removed today. And we have remnants of those forests left along the trail. We have massive bur oak trees that Lewis and Clark saw, bur oak trees that are over 350 years old, grow in the Missouri River Valley, along with huge pecans and cottonwoods. But those are remnants of the forest that was once there. And if people explore this land on the Katy Trail, driving the 2-lane blacktop roads through this countryside, they can experience some of the same things that Lewis and Clark and Daniel Boone and settlers in the 1800s saw.
Tell us a little about your writing process and how you arrived at creating your book.
I feel that all of my books start out differently, for one. Every book that I begin doesn't necessarily start the same way, but one common thing that they have is that it always starts with poetry, whether that's like a poetic idea that's in my head or whether that's a poem that I write out. So with Fly started out originally as a poem. I was sitting on a park bench in Pittsburgh and I was writing poetry. And within this poetry was my character. Within this poetry was the desires of my character, her wants, her goals. And then from that poem, because the story could not sit alone as poetry, it needed a narrative, it needed an arc, it needed plot, it needed other characters. And so I always go in to revise. So with the picture book, if it starts out as poetry, I'm going in, revising, but also adding what I think can enhance the story. Or if it's a longer story, like a novel or a chapter book, even if it starts as poetry, I am always thinking about the components within the poetry, my character, and really the heart of what my character wants. I think that within poetry, you can pull out heart and the wants and the desires and get down to the nuance of the story.
I don't think I'm alone in my writing process. I think there's been a lot of help. But I can tell you that I've always wanted to write. And as a teacher, there was always writing. There was curriculum, there were lesson plans, there were letters of recommendations for students, grants for education. But when I retired, I decided I really wanted to write for children. And so the idea for when I was an Alligator sort of came from a lot of places. I can kind of explain. When I was a little girl, my favorite story was a story about a little rabbit who wanted to be a bird. And he became a bird and finally figured out he'd rather be a rabbit. So I think the structure of the book, the message of the book comes a little bit from that. And then I brought my students and spent some time at the Wetlands Center in Lafayette here, and it was fascinating. And even growing up in Louisiana, I didn't know nearly as much about the wetlands as there is to know. We just studied the fragility. We followed a scientist who was tracking nutria to see how many nutria the marsh could sustain before it started deteriorating. And we just learned so much. And I think that was important to me in writing this book. And then my then 4-year-old great nephew walked into my house one day and announced, "Aunt Gayle, when I was an alligator," and he proceeded to tell me all about his life as an alligator. So I think I filed all of those things away, and eventually they sort of came out in this book. And I want to say that most people think, oh, it's a 480-word picture book. How hard can that be to write? You know, how long can that take to get off the ground? Well, it can take about 2 years, and it can be very difficult to write. Every word in a picture book has to count. There was lots of research that went into this. I researched lots of animals, tried to figure out the ones that kids would be most interested in, and then weave them into a story. And then I had all the informational text vetted by John Foray, who is a wetland scientist, just to make sure I was on the right track. So all of those things went into the actual writing and construction of the book. And then I have to give credit to all kinds of people: my husband, my book club, my writer's critique group, because they heard over and over again different versions of this story, different iterations of it, until I think we finally we got the words where they are today. Also, I have to talk about the art a little bit and how that interacts with the text. Again, Drew Beach, you mentioned, she's from Houma. So Houma, as you know, is surrounded by the wetlands, and she was an amazing artist who did a great job with the book, lots of layers in it. And so I was very privileged to be able to work with her and collaborate with her on this book.
I feel is somewhat unique in that I spend a lot of time drafting and writing in my head. By the time I get to sit at my laptop and start typing, I've pretty much created an outline, a concept, an opening sentence, possibly a closing sentence. And then, so that's the writing part of it. But because I write a lot of nonfiction, there is a lot of time spent reading old newspapers and digging through different periodicals. Again, I can't stress this enough. Working with so many different librarians and historical specialists, a lot of my work winds up enabling me to reach out to experts in a field to learn more about what I'm writing about from a practitioner's standpoint. And of course, where possible, to reach out to members of the family and interact with them and get primary information, which can't be beat. In the case of Susanna Salter, when I was writing the closing of the story, I had open on my desktop of my laptop a letter she had written her grandson. And it was discussing the election that's at the core of this story. And for me to sit there and read this and have it next to me as I wrote her story was a very special, emotional experience. It made me think a lot about the last song in Hamilton, in which I'm sure I'm not getting the exact words right, but who will tell your story? And I thought, wow, I am the person that is telling this person's story. And it's a great honor. So I take my research, I take my writing very seriously, and there are a lot of revisions. That's all I can say.
I would like to answer the question about our writing process as Dan's wife and as his editor. So I think I have some inside scoop on his process. Dan has always been very interested in history, and he loves nature and is a farmer. So a lot of this was already in his mind. And he came up with this concept of writing a book about 9 generations of children who grew up in the Missouri River Valley since the time that Lewis and Clark came through to the present day. And then as a math major, I said, 9 generations. No, it has to be 10 for the symmetry. And he said, there aren't 10 generations since Lewis and Clark. And so he chose these river towns, and he chose them for historically significant episodes in the life of the state of Missouri. So the river towns were chosen and the dates were chosen. And then his writing process was to gather as much information as he could and as we both could. So we relied upon the resources of local historical societies in Washington, Missouri, and Warren County, and the Missouri Historical Society and the Missouri History Museum. And we had this informal advisory board of historians, because we may be citizen historians, but we are lay people. And so we wanted everything in this book to be factually accurate. And so we had a group of advisors to read each chapter and to correct us on even costuming in some of the scenes. But as this book unfolded in a very, very rapid fashion, because that's how Dan writes, he had these chapters in mind. And at 4:30 every morning, I could hear the keyboard of this iPad that's before us right now. And I would come out and he would have a draft of yet another chapter. And he had the vision of, there's a captivating scene of this game that the children are playing in the very first chapter when Lewis and Clark come through. And the boy magically plants a baroque acorn where Lewis and Clark came ashore. And then the story unfolds as these trees are growing over the course of history. So when I read Dan's first draft of that, I just thought it was magical. And I knew that he could pull this off. All he needed was dialogue, and I raised my hand for that and wrote the dialogue, and we refined that together. But that was really our process. At the same time, because of how his mind works, he's a very visual person, very graphic, and he said he needed an original piece of art created by Brian Haynes, one of Missouri's most famous living painters. And he said, Brian, will you work with me on this book? And they collaborated on the cover art and on the art that's in every chapter, so that it's just an amazing book from, I think, the words that Dan put on the page and the art that Brian has provided to everyone.
And I would add, in my own defense, one of the key takeaways we wanted people to get from this book was how the actions of one generation have affected subsequent generations. We hope this is a teachable moment when we see through the 220 years of history we're talking about what the implications were of various decisions about the river valley, the river, the land along it for subsequent generations. And some of the stories we tell are pretty compelling, in some cases pretty disastrous, and the remedies to fix those situations we think are pretty interesting.
But that's also part of your writing process, is you would create a hook in one chapter, so in one river town, and we wouldn't really even quite know that that was going to be revisited later. And that was a very charming and engaging part of the book.
Well, when I started around Little Chaski, I knew I wanted to write a book set in the Inca Empire. That I knew that from the beginning. In other of my books, it's not like that. Usually I start with an idea, with a story, with a character, but in this case, it was the setting what got me first. So I started with the setting, and I started researching what kind of characters I could write about. And I was thinking about a princess or a ñusta in Quechua first, but then I thought, I don't know, I remember the Chaskis, which every Peruvian I think knows about what Chaskis are. And I thought it was very interesting because it was a system of like a postal service basically, but for the Inca or for official business. So and I thought it was very interesting to bring that to kids, and it could be very they could relate to that kind of work, and running through the empire and delivering something like in a relay system. So I thought it was super fun. So I started researching a little bit, and then I began writing. So I started with the setting, second character, and then the third part was actually building the story and the whole structure of the narrative.
The theme of this year's festival is Books Bring Us Together. How does your book bring people together?
I think the most important thing my book can do is to bring parents and kids together in a story that they just really enjoy. I think there's something magical, important and magical, and it's almost sacred when adults read to children. So I think that's really important. And also the idea of ecology and taking care of our wetlands and our animals, I think that absolutely brings people together. And I also think that when I was an Alligator has brought me together with so many people in the writing community that I would have never met, like you, Jim. I would have never met you for this. People who love to read, the kid lit community, all of those people have been brought together by this book. And I think it's been a wonderful experience for me and hopefully for other people that I've met.
I've thought a lot about that question. I think there are actually two answers. One, obviously, books like this book that are about a real person that existed in our history are great discussion pieces and great launch pads to talking about the time period in history and other relevant parts of the curriculum in schools, but also in your own home or with your own friends or family. But there's another part of it too. And that's a part that I think most people don't think about. And that's how the experience is for an author. And for instance, for me with this book, because I had to do so much research, I wound up meeting people all over the United States in various libraries, particularly Hale Library of Kansas State, where Susanna Salter was a student, actually in the school that became KSU, and the Kansas State Library and librarians in Ohio and other places. So it formed for me a really exciting and neat community of people. And ultimately, this book could not have been written without the extremely generous sharing of Susanna Salter's personal ephemera. In that way, I formed a beautiful friendship with family members of Susanna Salter's, and that brought them into this process and her story to future generations of even Salter family members. And so on the back end of it, from the author's perspective, it created a beautiful community for me to bring many people together. The other thing that was very exciting for me in terms of how books bring people together is because this topic dealt with a woman mayor, it gave me an opportunity to reach out and form an amazing connection with so many women mayors across this country. And it also really surprised me that in our major cities, 1/3 of them have never had a woman representing their city. And so I think what's been really exciting has been seeing some of these mayors reaching out to their community and sharing the book with them and having a dialogue so that children are actually being able to learn about the story from a mayor who is a woman and then talk with them about their experience. And that's the other point, that so many women who are mayors or who have served as mayor have said to me that Susanna's story is in many ways very reminiscent of their own experiences. So I just think that it really takes the point of what you gain from this book and gives it a very practical, somewhat surprising, and very interesting other level.
When I think about books bringing people together, I think about how when I was younger, my grandmother used to take me to the library, and she would pick out her book, I would pick out my book, and then we would come home and I would sit next to her and we would both read. And I think that that was a way to bond. So it was a way to, really figure out this love of reading and develop the love of reading, but also bond with family and gain a better understanding of my grandmother, and my grandmother gaining a better understanding of myself. I think that books bring families together in this way, but also books bring community together. So I was a children's specialist at the library, and I would do story times, and just seeing toddlers on their parents' lap reading, listening to me read, but then also coming up to the story, trying to turn the page. There's a bond that happens, the bond with the book, the bond with the family. And I think that very much within those settings, whether it's at home or the library, just reading together is what's vital, is what's important, is what really helps children to gain an understanding of themselves and to gain the confidence and the skills that they need for the future.
I feel like I'm opening a door with some of the themes that I write about. I'm opening a door to other cultures, to other places. I love writing about history, and I feel like when I write historical fiction, I'm building a time machine, right? So we can step in a book and go back in time and go to another place and meet those people and those cultures and have a better understanding. So I think my work hopefully is bringing us together by building those bridges of understanding, empathy, and getting to know each other.
When Dan wrote this book, he wanted it, first of all, to bring generations together. So it's often described as a children's book, but it's really more of a family book. It's a book that young readers can read, adolescent readers can enjoy, but parents and grandparents all can share in these stories. And in fact, we've had some visitors to our country store come in who are in their 90s and say that they lived these stories. So it brings us together generationally, one way. And another way that this book brings us together is it was designed to connect all of these river towns along the Missouri River. And it's about getting families together, getting groups of friends together, getting scouts together, getting any kind of American explorer group together today, and getting out into the Missouri countryside, learning about its beauty, learning about its history, and being able to actually visit the places that are described in the book and imagine, based on these stories, what life was like in Missouri in those times.